The most recent episode of The Last of Us has to be the most perplexing episode this season. Specifically because it had some high moments of the season, but every high was followed or built off of some lows. And this odd back and forth between good moments and positive changes with negative ones begins with the opening scene. The opening of this episode has the task of introducing spores in this universe, since they will be necessary for the end of this episode. And while I have been quite frustrated with the fact that they've been cut out till this point, the way in which the TV show introduced them was quite haunting. Elsie Park, who was a leader of a WLF unit, was tasked with clearing out the lower levels of the hospital when her son chillingly discovered the spores. In response to this, Elise has to make the gut-wrenching decision of locking all the doors and letting her son and team rot underneath them in order to prevent any sort of leak. And this cold opening was quite fantastic. It reminded me of the cold openings we got in the first 2 episodes of Season 1, doing a great job of setting the tone for the episode. However, the very next scene is one that I'm not really quite fond of. After the opening, we get a scene where Dina and Ellie are discussing how to get to the hospital. And almost immediately, I started to become frustrated because of how dumb the TV show thinks Ellie is. Ellie is a pretty intelligent person. She isn't some stupid girl that needs simple logistics and strategy explained to her. And I honestly can't tell if this was supposed to be a meta joke, but HBO, we really don't need a scene of Dora the Explorer explaining to Ellie how a map works. Furthermore, this scene begins to establish something that gets further pushed later that to me really cheapens the character of Ellie. For some odd reason, it feels as if Dina is the true main character of this show. She formulates strategies, pushes Ellie to continue forwards, and even later has to explain to her why she should want revenge in the first place. Which I find absolutely mind-numbing, especially when compared to the way Game Ellie carries herself. I'm glad we're getting more development for Dina, but it shouldn't have to come at the expense of Ellie's character. We then get a scene, straight from the game, where Ellie begins to play Joel's song, but stops because she just doesn't have it in her. And aside from the fact that I wish we had heard Joel's song at the beginning of the season, I don't have any real complaints here. It's a solid enough scene. We then get a scene where Dina exposition dumps who the Scars are and what their deal is. And I don't really fault the TV show for this, as much as I fault the game for it, because in both adaptations, the Scars are introduced with a lot of exposition. Still a flaw, but not entirely the show's fault. But I will say, I absolutely love this shot of the dead Scars laid at the feet of the Prophet. It does a lot in terms of showcasing the absolute hatred that these two opposing factions have for one another. Now the next scene is a perfect example of the highs and lows this episode generated. We get this long scene where Dina talks a lot, and the first part of her monologue is actually a good addition to the story. She tells Ellie the story of the first person she ever killed, and I think this backstory actually does a lot in making Dina more of a character and not just Ellie's love interest. But she caps the story off with lecturing Ellie as to why she needs to take revenge for Joel. And I'm not gonna lie, I really didn't appreciate this. I found it obnoxious that Dina has to push Ellie into being vengeful. This is something that Ellie should already feel and understand. I really wish we had a moment here during this monologue where Ellie becomes frustrated with Dina and shuts her down, citing that she already knows and she wants Abby dead. And this is a criticism for the whole show, not just this episode. Ellie just doesn't talk about Abby enough. In the games, Ellie is absolutely obsessed. Abby's name is said with every other word, and at this point in the TV show, it feels as if Abby is an afterthought. It's like they've taken some of Ellie's character and given it to Dina. Moving on, the next set of scenes we get are when Dina and Ellie move through this warehouse in order to get to the hospital. And this scene is one that goes from really good to really stupid really quick. The actual build-up of the scene is really good. The warehouse is super eerie, really well lit, and the actual stalkers were genuinely terrifying. I'm still frustrated we haven't seen the Shamblers, but I have to give credit where credit is due. The stalkers look, sound, and act in such a perfectly terrifying way. And watching Dina and Ellie slowly realize that they are surrounded was great to see. But this is where the problems begin. At this point, Dina and Ellie are dead. They are just gone. Even in the game, if you get more than 3 stalkers around you at a time, you're dead. And Ellie and Dina are dealing with 10. So the action scene commences, and this scene is an absolute disaster. Somehow Dina is able to make it all the way across the warehouse to this very well-placed protection cage without getting swarmed. And then, when a stalker jumps at the cage, Ellie takes a random, no-look pistol shot at the stalker, who is literally right in front of Dina. When this happened, I audibly laughed out loud, because not only did it look ridiculous, but this shot could have easily struck Dina and mortally wounded her. And somehow, this scene gets worse. Ellie then gets jumped on and attacked by not 1, not 2, but 3 different stalkers, who happen to conveniently just gnaw at her lower half in a gentle manner, one at a time. And listen, I'm more than willing to suspend my disbelief for a product, but this is just ridiculous. Ellie is dead, or at the very least, heavily injured to the point where she can no longer move. The fact that she gets out of this unscathed, like it never even happened, is beyond obnoxious. But no worries, Ellie, because somehow Jesse is here to save the day. And this, for me, is another complicated change. On one hand, I'm quite happy that Jesse is entering the story a bit earlier. Jesse's character is one of my biggest criticisms of The Last of Us 2. He's this incredibly likable character who's very important for the overall story, but he gets like 3 lines, dies, and then his name is never brought up again. But on the other hand, the way that they shoehorn him into this scene is genuinely devoid of all logic. There is just no way on planet Earth that Jesse would have been able to find them so quickly, let alone arriving literally seconds before Dina and Ellie are killed. Somehow, someway, Jesse, who left a whole day after Ellie and Dina, tracks them down to the theater, which means he must have somehow tracked them through the tunnels, even though that would be logistically impossible due to the fact that there is a horde down there, or he just knew they would go there somehow and chose a different path. Either way, you would think Jesse had an AirTag on Dina with the way he gets to them right on time. Not only that, but Jesse literally sees with his own 2 eyes and a flashlight that there are 3 different stalkers on Ellie, and he doesn't think to actually check to see if she's been bit. Genuinely, such a ludicrous scene. Also, he has aimbot turned on here, but that's besides the point. Then, in the next scene, where our group runs into the woods to hide from WLF, Ellie actually asks Jesse how he was able to find them so fast, and Jesse literally responds with, "Do I look like I want to talk to you right now?" The show literally tells you outright not to ask questions because the second you think about it, it starts to fall apart. Jesse saved the day because he's a Chad and we're moving on. Side note, the casting for Jesse is ridiculously good. Moving on, we get this scene of the Seraphites hanging someone the same way they do in the game. This scene was game accurate, which I appreciate, but I am 100% sure that scars aren't allowed to have any facial hair. So why does this random dude have a full lavish beard? Just a funny detail. But moving on, a scar spots our group, takes a shot, and strikes Dina in the quad, which prompts Ellie to tell Jesse to take her and run. And somehow, this works. All of the scars chase Ellie and leave Jesse and Dina be, even though they were all right next to one another. Until Ellie runs just a bit too fast, and they all just give up on trying to find her, NPC style. Just so insane to watch. We then get a scene where Ellie sneaks into the hospital by crawling through the grass right in front of a dog into and through a little hole in the wall. And while this isn't the end of the world, this was just such an uninspired way of breaking in. If we're being totally honest, that dog would have been off leash and on her in a second. This scene looks especially weak when you compare it to the game, where Ellie ends up stabbing someone who seemed like a good person in the throat in order to sneak into the hospital. That scene has a lot more stress and weight to it, and it even helps develop Ellie's character. This scene just functions as a way for her to get into the hospital. Nothing more. And now we get to the big moment of this episode, Norah's conclusion. And now is probably a good time to bring up the pacing. The Last of Us 2 is a game riddled with pacing issues. It's both extremely slow and fast at times. And unfortunately, the TV show hasn't only carried on with the game's pacing issues, but it's actively made them worse. This season is running as fast as Norah if you catch up to her. It's wild how quickly we jump from one scene to the next. It refuses to ever let you sit with one scene before the next begins. They all just roll into one another. But moving forward, after confronting Norah, we get a similar chase scene to the game, but with one key difference. In the game, since both Ellie and Norah know what spores are, Ellie makes the decision to pull them both into it. While in the TV show, Norah jumps into the hall because she had to and didn't know what the spores actually were. And while personally, I find the game's rendition of this better, I don't think it's a terrible change that removes a lot of its significance. But here is probably a good time to praise the effects and makeup team at HBO because the spores look absolutely incredible. Seeing what once were people just completely melted into the walls was terrifying. I also loved the way the air looked. I really do believe they did a phenomenal job with the spores, even though they should have added them far earlier in the story. And with that, we get to the final scene of the episode, Norah's torture and demise. And I gotta say, for what it's worth, they nailed this scene. I really believe Bella Ramsey did a great job portraying the rage and emotion of Ellie in this moment. And even though I personally prefer the subtlety of Norah's lines in the game over her monologue, I still think the scene worked and was strong overall. I made a point in my last video that the majority of the issues with Ellie's character stem from the writing and not the portrayal. And this scene cemented that opinion in stone for me. When given the proper material, Bella Ramsey makes a fine Ellie. All in all, I found this episode to be an absolute mess, with a few things here and there to enjoy. But hey, looks like Pedro's going to be back for next week's episode, and I hope that one is a little better than this one was. If you've made it this far, Thank you so much for watching. Please, in the comments down below, let me know not only what you thought about the episode, but what you thought about my video. Any criticism is welcome, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Peace. The Last of Us Episode 6 was easily the best episode of Season 2, so far. Probably due to the fact that they had an actual writing team behind this one, and not just Craig Mazin. But also because Pedro Pascal was back as the main character. But it's not perfect, and today we're going to break down why. Starting the episode off, we have some new content, and for the first time this season, I can happily say the content we've gotten is really good. We flash back to 1986 to see a part of Joel and Tommy's childhood. We find out that Joel comes from a somewhat broken home, with Tommy terrified that he will be beaten by his father for buying some drugs. There also doesn't seem to be a mother figure around, and immediately we see Joel willing to take the brunt of the abuse in order to protect his little brother. Something that will come up later in this episode as well. But instead of getting the stereotypical abusive dad coming home to beat his kids, we actually get a complex and impactful scene between a father and his son. Tony Dalton, who continues to be one of the best actors working currently, is phenomenal in the role of Officer Miller. The moment he walks into the frame, the tension is palpable. This is a man and son who have a difficult history together. But instead of immediately beating Joel or Tommy, Officer Miller actually parents Joel in a proper manner, logically explaining to Joel why Tommy and his decisions were bad ones, and how even though they didn't know it, he covered for them by not allowing them to be sent to juvie. And it was at this moment that I realized this scene was really good. And fortunately, it gets better. After Joel tells his father with contempt in his eyes that he won't hurt Tommy, we see Officer Miller walk towards the fridge and grab both him and his son a beer, cracking it open for Joel, sitting down next to him, and having him drink it, symbolizing that he isn't talking down to his son anymore, and that instead he's respecting him as a man. And then the best scene of the season begins. Officer Miller begins to tell Joel a story about when he was reprimanded by his father at the age of 10 for stealing a candy bar. The story begins rather normally, with his father making him return it and say sorry, only for the story to suddenly and abruptly shift tone when we're told that right at the end of the car ride, Officer Miller's father broke his jaw, leaving his son with a mouth wired shut for 2 months. A moment in his life that wasn't only physically painful, but emotionally traumatic as well, due to the embarrassment that came with the whole town knowing his father was abusive. And there are a multitude of reasons why Officer Miller tells Joel this story. The first one is explaining why he hits Tommy and Joel to begin with. And it's not something he enjoys doing. It's a flaw in his system that's there due to generational trauma. The second is, in his own way, he's saying sorry for his actions, explaining that he's doing the best he knows how, but he admits he goes too far and makes mistakes. And the last and most important reason is to hopefully show Joel why he can and needs to be better than he was. In explaining his flaws, he attempts to lessen the potential generational trauma that Joel will have and pass on. The scene then ends with Officer Miller gently but firmly grasping Joel's shoulder, symbolizing the love, pride, and hope that he has for his son. And I just have to say, this scene is an absolute masterpiece. The rest of the episode and rest of the season aside, I absolutely adored this scene, and I'm quite satisfied with this simple but effective backstory for Joel. Now the next major scene is a flashback to Ellie's 15th birthday. And this is kinda sorta new content. In this flashback, we get to see Joel build Ellie her guitar. and finally sing her his song. And while I personally prefer this scene being at the start of the game, I did rather enjoy this flashback. Watching Joel, this hardened, rough around the edges survivor, take so much care and be so delicate with his daughter's gift was so beautiful. I also really enjoyed the added scene of him interacting with Ellie after she burned herself. Pedro Pascal does such an amazing job at playing the hardened father figure who's learning to love again. I also really like Bella's performance as young Ellie here. She fits the tone and vibe of her, and all around I found this flashback quite enjoyable and touching. The next flashback is basically a one-to-one adaptation from the game, with 2 little added details, both of which I enjoy. I thought Ellie climbing the T-Rex was pretty cute, and her choosing her helmet by throwing a rock through the glass was also pretty fun. As far as the scene in the spaceship goes, I don't have a lot to say here other than it was super solid. It was emotional, like it was in the game, and again, Pedro bringing a level of softness to the character of Joel here with the tear that I know some people complain about, but I think it works for the character. I also really enjoyed the final shot of this scene, of Ellie staring at the fireflies, showing the audience that while she has had some fun times with Joel, the question of what really happened still bugs her. Moving on, the next flashback we get is on Ellie's 17th birthday, where Joel finds her fooling around with someone and getting a tattoo. And all this flashback really accomplishes is the fact that Ellie and Joel are kind of on the outs, but Joel is still trying to be a good dad the best he can. Which brings us to another entirely new flashback that in many ways I really do like, but I'm not quite sure if I like it for the reasons the writers intended me to. This flashback encompasses the death of Eugene, something that was hinted at in the first episode. Joel and Ellie are called to help him on patrol when they realize that he has been bitten. Now Eugene wants to go back to Jackson and have a final word with his wife, and Joel and Ellie have a very different conclusion on how to handle the situation. Joel believes that they need to kill him now, because if they don't, they are putting their lives and the lives of other people at risk. Not to mention the fact that this will only be harder if he's around loved ones. While Ellie believes that since he was freshly bitten and isn't showing signs of turning at this very moment, that he should be brought back. And I'm going to be honest, Joel is making a lot more sense than Ellie right now. Let's break this down logically. Ellie's decision to bring him back to Jackson hinges on one thing. His hand didn't shake in the 10 seconds that he held it out, which means he has enough time to get back. And immediately, her argument starts to fall apart due to the fact that this unit of measurement is faulty at best. People turn at different rates. Tess was starting to show signs within an hour, while Sam went half a day without showing any signs of turning. So Ellie's argument hinges on nothing more than hope and luck. Now, let's look at why Joel wants to handle this now. 1. Eugene is thinking selfishly. He doesn't want to go back to Jackson for the sake of Gale. He wants to go back for the sake of himself. He feels so strongly about this that he's willing to point a gun at Joel and Ellie. So immediately, he's being erratic, which is dangerous. But not only that, if Joel ties him up, what happens if he starts to turn on the journey back to Jackson? Aside from the fact that it's a danger to Joel and Ellie, is it more human to let the man lose himself and all dignity than it is to let him die with it intact? But let's say, by the grace of God, Eugene makes it back to Jackson. Then what? Well, 1, having an infected person at the town does add some danger to the situation, but I will say it's probably minimal. The real issue is how do you handle it then? What happens if right when you get to Jackson, he starts to turn? What if, God forbid, he starts to turn in front of Gale, with her final memory of him being him turning into the monsters they have been fighting? And once that happens, actually putting him down becomes a far more difficult task. What if Gale tries to stop them? Do they do it in front of her? In front of other people if he turns at the wrong time? I hope you get what I'm trying to say here. There are just far too many variables and highly probable negative outcomes to justify bringing him back to Jackson. Which is why the mistake Joel makes here isn't killing Eugene, it's lying to Ellie. Ellie and Joel's relationship throughout Game 1 is built on trust, and in lying to her, he betrays the foundation of their relationship. Do I understand why he did it? Absolutely. He knew she would put up a fight about it, which would negatively affect all parties involved, and he is her father and doesn't want to expose her to any more violence than necessary. This isn't something that she has to see happen. So what does Joel do? Does he maniacally laugh and shoot Eugene point blank? No. He takes him to a beautiful place, gives him some kind words of advice, lets him make peace with himself, and then with pain in his eyes, gives Eugene the mercy of death. And I absolutely loved this whole interaction. It's a great scene that shows the hard realities of this world, while also showing the strength you must have in order to keep on living. Aside from lying to Ellie, which even then has logical reasoning, Joel putting Eugene down was a logical mercy. Which brings us to my first true conflict with this episode. When Joel is burying Eugene with Gale, he has a few words for her on behalf of her husband. He begins by saying, "He was bit when we found him," which is true. He then says, "He wanted to tell you that he loved you," also true. He then says, "He wished he could say goodbye to you in person, but he didn't want to put you in danger." Also true, since in his final moments with Joel, he comes to understand why it has to be this way and makes peace with the decision. He follows this up by saying, he wasn't scared. He was brave and ended it himself. Which is again, also true. In making peace with the decision, Eugene was brave. We literally get a shot where we see him stop shaking, showing that he has overcome his fear and is ready to go. And while Joel was the one who literally took the shot, he waited for Eugene to be ready, and in a way, let Eugene decide when he wanted to die. Sure, Joel pulled the trigger, but only after Eugene had welcomed it. Joel doesn't tell a single lie in this entire speech. It's beautiful, touching, and bittersweet for Gale, who is devastated that her husband is dead, but gets the closure that he at least went in peace. But then, Ellie absolutely destroys this moment by saying that Joel is lying. Saying Eugene was absolutely terrified, he was willing to put you in danger, and then Joel executed him like a wild animal. And this scene with Ellie pissed me off, I'm not gonna lie. I understand why she said this, since she's mad at Joel for lying to her, and because she doesn't actually have the full story, since she didn't see what happened to Eugene in his final moments. But at this point, Ellie is out of line, and it feels a bit out of character for her. Really, when you think about it, all Ellie does here is hurt Gale, by unknowingly stating incorrect information as if it were fact, and that really sucks. Gale now hates Joel, and has a terrible false reality that portrays her husband in a far worse light. And all because Ellie is mad at Joel for something that had nothing to do with Gale and Eugene. Such a shame. But then, Gale slaps Joel across the face. And at first, this moment really pissed me off because it's so unfair to Joel. Ellie removed all nuance from a nuanced situation that negatively affected Joel, which leads to him getting slapped after doing the right thing. But then, I sat there for a second and realized that this actually makes Joel a better character. At the start of this video, I mentioned how in Joel's flashback we're shown that he's more than willing to take physical and mental abuse in order to protect the feelings of people he cares about. So in this moment, when he gets slapped, what he could have done is explain to Gale what actually happened and undermine Ellie, making her look and feel terrible, while also further confusing and possibly hurting Gale due to the confusion. But he doesn't, because he's trying to protect them. So just like when he was a kid with Tommy, we have a character who is willing to take the brunt of the pain that's meant for his loved ones in order to protect them. But I'm not sure this is what the writers intended. I've seen a lot of people online say Joel is a terrible person and was lying. And I feel like we're directed to sort of agree with Ellie here, but that's not how it plays out. And because of that, we're left with this really strong character moment for Joel, and I'm not sure if it was meant to hit the way that it did, but it did. And now we have the most challenging flashback of the whole episode. The final flashback we get is a complicated one. It is emotionally resonant in and of itself, while also being flawed and potentially damaging to the future of the show. The big scene of this flashback is Joel and Ellie talking on the porch, and when the scene started, my jaw was on the floor. This scene combines two different scenes from the game. Instead of just being the scene where Ellie tells Joel she'd like to try and mend their relationship, they combined that scene with the scene in which she discovers the truth about what happened to the Fireflies. And I want to go over the positives of this scene first. First of all, the acting on display is very solid. The agony, guilt, and sadness that is written all across Joel's face speaks volumes about the way he feels about Ellie. And I think Bella Ramsey does a pretty good job in the scene as well. Not only that, but I enjoyed the added lines. Joel telling Ellie that he loves her and that one day she may understand was solid, and I particularly enjoyed the line where he calls back to his own father by saying that he just hopes she does better than he did. And that aspect, great scene, and a great one-episode arc for Joel. But now, we have to get to the issues. With the first being, I just can't buy Ellie finding out about the truth and working on forgiving Joel within the same minute. Even though I'm well aware that she basically knew for years at this point, I just can't believe that she would come to this conclusion so quickly. That kind of bombshell would need at least a few days to process, even if she has known deep down all along. And the other issue I have is a more complicated one, due to the fact that it all depends on what they do in the future now. For those of you who don't know, this scene is one of the final ones in the game. You spend 17 hours thinking Ellie and Joel ended on awful terms, just to find out that in the final 15 minutes they ended on a hopeful one. And this scene destroyed me in the game. It got me to cry on stream, I'm not gonna lie. And in putting it in the story so early, some of that impact was definitely lost. I think if you view it without comparison, it's not as bad, but there is going to be comparison, obviously. But now, it begs the question, how do you end the show? Do you show the same scene? Show a different one? Or none at all? Which is why we actually need to see the ending of the entire story in order to judge the scene in its entirety. All in all, I thought this episode was pretty good. It wasn't perfect, and I'm not too sure how much of its greatness was intended, but I enjoyed my time, and it pulled some good emotions out of me. Now, with all that being said, if you've made it this far, thank you for watching. Please leave me a comment down below, letting me know what you thought about my video, and what you think about The Last of Us Season 2. The only question I have left is, with one more week of The Last of Us Season 2, I'm not really going to know what to make since that content isn't going to be around anymore. Maybe I'll make a few more videos, but I'm not too sure. So please, let me know in the comments down below what you want to see out of my content for the near future. Your input is always appreciated, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have an amazing day. Peace. The Last of Us Season 2 finale is, ironically enough, a microcosm for how I feel about the entire TV show. It's messy, it's riddled with issues, it doesn't make much sense most of the time, but there are a few solid moments in throughout that I genuinely enjoyed. So let's talk about why. The episode starts off right where episode 5 ends, with Ellie returning to the theater after torturing Norah. and immediately, this scene just feels off. First of all, I don't want to rag on Bella Ramsey too much, but the acting in the video game is just far better. Bella Ramsey's performance doesn't feel as natural as Ashley Johnson's, and this scene showcased that more than any other for me. Also, did anyone else have to turn subtitles on to understand her? I don't know if she was mumbling or there was something wrong with the audio, but I could not hear her at all in this scene. But the bigger issue I have with this scene is the dialogue and the characterization. And the first point I have to make is that this scene lacks any amount of subtlety. This has been a major issue for the entire season, and it's sure highlighted here. It feels as if the TV show is trying to hold your hand throughout the entire scene, as if unless something is said verbatim, it doesn't actually exist. Compare this to the game that doesn't have much dialogue and leaves a lot of emotion up to the player to decipher and chew on, and you'll realize just how weak this scene is in comparison. Beyond that, I can't stand how Dina seems to be more motivated and vengeful than Ellie is. By this point in the game, Dina is practically begging Ellie to drop the quest for revenge because she can see what it's doing to her. But in the show, it's almost as if Dina is the one pushing her forward. I specifically didn't like the lines where Dina said that Norah deserved it, and Ellie said maybe she didn't. It just felt completely and utterly out of character. To make matters worse, the scene continues with Ellie exposition dumping for over a minute about the events at the end of Season 1, and how Abby was just trying to get revenge for her father, and how revenge might be bad, yada yada yada. And I really don't like this. In the game, Ellie never explicitly knows Joel kills Abby's dad. She knows Abby killed Joel because of something that happened at the hospital, but she doesn't know the specifics. And this ignorance to the full story I find very interesting, since it's a bit of information that if Ellie knew may affect the way she felt about Abby, which is why she isn't aware of it to begin with. And what's very interesting is Ellie says this, but it doesn't actually matter later in the episode. So why include this scene if it doesn't change the way Ellie thinks or feels down the line? But with that terrible scene concluding, I want to talk about my first big pro of this episode. Jesse. Jesse is the MVP of tonight's episodes for me. I've heard some people say they don't like that he's sort of a jerk to Ellie, but I think it makes perfect sense. Ellie is being quite irrational throughout this episode, and Jesse serves as a moral compass and sense of logic for Ellie. I also really enjoyed that he not only knows about his child, but is very, very serious about being there for the child as his father. This line in particular, about not being able to die since he's going to be a dad, really stings in hindsight. But unfortunately, with the next scene, we have Ellie acting stupid and out of character again. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but Ellie thinking it's a good idea to take on 6 armed men when they are in the middle of a war zone, and gunfire would for sure alert more soldiers, was a dumb thing to try and do, and I'm very glad Jesse was here to keep her alive. We then get a quick scene where Isaac explains that he's frustrated with Abby because he wanted her to succeed him, and I enjoyed this scene. Isaac is definitely a character from the game that needed more screen time, and while the scene seems a bit out of place in terms of pacing, I'm glad it's here. Unfortunately, though, we get another insufferable Ellie moment where she acts out of character for no reason right after this scene. Jesse and her sit down to discuss morality, and Jesse basically tells her that he stayed in Jackson and saved Ellie because at the end of the day, he's a good person who looks out for his friends. And Ellie here gives him a wicked attitude for this statement, and that really annoyed me since he didn't say anything wrong here. However, I do see the argument that she is projecting and she's meant to come off insufferable, but I feel there's a way to pull that off, and it just didn't work for me here. However, I will say the next scene, Ellie is insufferable again, but this time I think it worked very well. When Ellie is choosing to go after Abby instead of helping Tommy, and she blows up on Jesse, she came off super deranged, and for the first time this entire season, it really does seem like her lust for revenge is consuming her. Bella Ramsey also had some decent dialogue to work with here, alongside great sets, and lo and behold, for the first time all season, she kind of seemed like the Ellie we got and knew from the game. Good scene overall. A good scene that's unfortunately followed by two of the dumbest scenes in the entire season. Ellie getting hit by a giant wave and surviving was dumb, and completely took me out of the story. This is a storm that not even Michael Phelps would survive, let alone someone who learned how to swim at 14 and has barely done it since. But due to some crazy plot armor, she survives, only to wash up on the Seraphite shore that's a mile away from where she crashes, in which she is immediately taken and almost hung. But instead of the Seraphites killing Ellie, since they believe she's a member of WLF, the very group they are fighting literally at this moment, they decide to not only not finish the job, but let her down and let her go. And all I have to say is, this scene was completely random, and I genuinely laughed at my TV while it was playing out. Which brings us to a major scene for the episode, and weirdly enough, a scene that I quite like. Ellie confronts Owen and Mel, and because Owen is a selfish weirdo who can't get over his ex, Ellie ends up killing Owen and Mel. Now, I have heard some people argue that this scene is weak compared to the game, since Ellie kills Mel on accident, but in truth, I think it's far dumber for Mel to attack Ellie like she does in the game than it is for her to get hit by a stray bullet. Now, this was all expected, but what was added that I thought was heartbreaking and a great addition was the C-section scene. Mel trying to coach Ellie through an emergency C-section while dying was so unbelievably horrible and heartbreaking. It did a lot in characterizing someone from the game that desperately needed it, and the fact that Ellie not only has to accept the fact that she killed Mel, but also didn't have it in her to try and save the child added a whole other level of tragedy to this scene. A rare example in the season of a positive change that I believe enhanced the story. Now the next scene is Abby confronting Ellie, and it's basically a one-to-one from the game. Jesse's death was super tragic and well done, and Abby, even without her muscles, is incredibly menacing. And now it's probably a good time to point out that Caitlin Dever is such an unbelievable talent, and even though I disagree with some character decisions regarding Abby, I am genuinely excited to see what she can bring to the table next season. And finally, I think the decision to end this season on Abby Day 1 is a bit odd. I believe it gives away too much of what Season 3 will be, and personally, if I was in charge, I would have just ended it with a gunshot on the cliffhanger. All in all, this episode was a mixed bag. It had a lot of bad decisions and poor moments, but it somehow, some way, managed to make me smile, and I had a good time towards the end. And if somehow, some way, the writing team could pull it together, there are some signs of life for Season 3. But I'd advise to prepare for the worst and only hope for the best. If you've made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. Please let me know in the comment section down below, not only what you think about my video, but what you thought of Last of Us Season 2 and the finale. Just to tell you guys what my future content is going to be, sometime this week I am going to drop a full review of The Last of Us Season 2, and hopefully I'll catch you then. Again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to catch you in the next video. Peace.